Hi everyone, Christian Quinn here from Hyde Motor Works, and today I'll be showing you how to install our Nemesis 1 supercharged kit on my BMW E87. Now, just for some prerequisites for the kit, you're going to want to do some preparation. So removing your window cowling, which comes out to here, these clip off. There'll be 4 M8 screws there. There'll be, 4 screws. There'll be 2 8mm bolts here and on the other side underneath some plastic covers, then an electrical connector on that side. The whole thing should just slide out. That'll just give you some more room to work in through here. You'll also want to remove your strut braces. So there's a flathead style fitting here. You undo that, and then you have one strut brace here with I think it's a 50mm, an eTorx 50. One on both sides and then a big one in the middle, just to give you a bit of more access to the engine bay. You'll also want to drain your coolant, as we're going to be removing a few coolant lines here just to reroute, and just give it an overall tidy up. You don't want any sort of metal shavings or anything getting into your intake system. Some modifications you're going to have to do on the E87, as you can see here, you're going to have to clearance the back firewall. This just gives it a bit more room for the piping to come up and around. You'll see that later. If you're going to do this, I would highly recommend removing your ECU and ECU box. This just gives you a bit of a better idea of where everything's going and what needs more clearance. It also means you can see if you're going to contact the box. Another top tip is to move your hood into a more easily serviceable position. Remove the gas struts from each side and prop your hood up on one of the points using some type of broom handle or any solid stick that'll go the whole way up, and just find a solid place for that to go. You can see this isn't going anywhere, it's not going to fall on your head. Besides that, just making as much room as you can possible. You also need to remove your serpentine belt by loosening the tensioner and taking off the auxiliary belt. The power steering reservoir will have to be removed too. And besides that, there's not a lot. And your radiator shroud. This just gives you a bit extra room, and that will have to be modified later as well. For the intercooler itself, if you're fitting an intercooler, remove your front bumper. It's pretty straightforward. There's plenty of videos online for that as well. Yeah, let's get into it. Here I'm just going to take you through some of the parts that are supplied with the kit, as well as other parts that may need to be modified or you may need to purchase yourself. Here we have the belt, which connects the drive shaft pulley to the supercharger itself. This is a 6PK 1165 belt. This may be available through Hyde Motor Works, or you may have to get it from your local parts store, but they're quite a common size. You should be able to find it no problem, or online. Here we have the Eaton M62 supercharger. This has been modified for use on the E87, as there's a slightly different aircon pump. As you can see here, this back corner has been shaved off, which means the bottom bracket won't be needed on the E87, but we'll be able to use on the older E46 chassis. Here we have your top front mount and your bottom front mount. Again, these parts are slightly rough because they're still in prototyping, but they'll be 100% for when you purchase off Hyde Motor Works. Next, we move on to all the piping that's supplied with the kit. Here we have our supercharger inlet manifold. This has been modified for use for the E87 as well. On the actual kit, it would have a 90-degree bend that comes off here, but I've cut that just for clearance issues. We have an adapter plate for this, so this will bolt onto the back of the Eaton and adapt this plate. We have the supercharger outlet. This has also been modified for clearance for the alternator on the E87. We have our inlet to throttle body, so this connects to this pipe. It's also got an extra T for your blow-off valve. Moving on, we have the intake manifold pipe. This will be bolted up to the intake manifold and has the outlet for your bypass valve. Here we move on to the bypass valve. Hoses you will have to buy yourself. You can either use 25mm heated hose like I have here, the silicone hose. Depending on the heat in your engine bay, you might have to do some testing. I'm using vinyl tubing here, which is rated up to 50 degrees, which should be okay, but it may need to be changed later. Another optional extra is to use an oil catch can on your N46, as these engines are known to have a lot of crankcase ventilation problems. Using a catch can, especially with boost, will help with that a little bit. You will have to drain it probably once a month or once every 2 months, depending on your engine's oil usage. Here we move on, the stock throttle body, that's all the same. We have our bracket that will be used to relocate the auxiliary mounting, the auxiliary water pump. So this is just a 3D print, it's not complete, but I've snapped it in half just to show you. There'll be two configurations, either the pump can sit upright or it can sit slightly at an angle depending on the model of your car. Here we have all of our hardware, so all of our T-bolt clamps. We have the stock hardware for the alternator. We have the power steering reservoir extended stud. Here I'm just using a bolt. We have the intake manifold pipe bolts. Depending on if you have an E46 or an E87, the E46 does have threaded inserts. The E87, you may need to modify your intake manifold as it uses plastic and screws instead of bolts, but I'll show you how to do that later. Here we have our supercharger bolts for mounting up the different pipes. These are M8 socket head by 20mm. We have the throttle body bolts. These are socket head, but you could use hex head depending on the clearance. These are M6 by 60mm with a bolt. With a nut. You will have washers with this too. And then we get to the supercharger mounting bolts. These are M8 by 100mm, and you'll have 2 washers on there too. Moving forward, here are some of the silicon couplers. These can be bought off Hyde Motor Works with our intercooler kit, or you can custom make your own kit. Some of the pipes will need to be cut. These aren't too pretty, but they'll do the job as long as you have decent clamps. Moving forward, we have a pod filter. This is a 3-inch pod filter to suit the E87 mass airflow sensor. This does have adjustable rings, and it was just a cheap K&N clone, but you can use any 3-inch pod filter. If you have a E87, the E46 may be different, and I'm not sure on the E90. Next, you'll need 6mm vacuum hosing. This is to connect your boost sensor, also to connect your bypass valve if it has vacuum on the top, which it should. Moving forward, here are some of the parts that you will have to modify on the E87. I'm not sure if this is the same for the E46, but to make it work on the E87, you will have to modify these parts. Just going ahead, we have some intercooler piping, which was just from a custom-made kit that I made. You will have to cut things and stuff unless you use the Hyde Motor Works kit. But some of the bends and things on the different chassis will be different. For the E87, here's the modified parts that you may need. For the top coolant hose, I have extended this hose just because of the routing of my intercooler piping. This has to sort of wrap around the coolant hose, the intercooler piping, sorry. Here's the power steering reservoir mount. It would mount up like this. As you can see, I've cut off the section here, which also has a foot that comes down. This is just to make clearance for the intercooler piping as well. Your setup may be different depending on how you route it. My car has the M Sport front bumper with brake ventilation. So here I've just melted the plastic and pushed it in using a wooden dowel and just rolled it. So you heat it up, push it in and roll it. This just gives some clearance for the intercooler piping which comes up. I'll show you that later too. And finally, the radiator fan shroud. This will have to be modified on the E87 as the space, the depth in the engine bay is slightly different to the E46. This isn't the prettiest job as I'm still test fitting, but what I've done here is cut out a section here and here for the pipe to go through, otherwise it hits on here. As you can see, the fan is still sturdy. It should work fine, but you will have to do that just for clearance issues unless you route your intercooler piping differently. Now next we'll be putting on our supercharger inlet and outlet manifolds. With the final Hyde Motor Works Nemesis kit, there will be gaskets supplied. You can use the stock Eaton M62 gasket for the Mercedes M111 on the outlet side, but on the inlet side, as the design at the inlet manifold is different, you will have to use the Hyde Motor Works gasket. For the purposes of this video, I will be using RTV. I know it's not the best, but until I get the proper gaskets, that's what I'll be using. Now, for the surfaces, you're really going to want to prep and clean both the surface of the supercharger and the surface of your manifold. This is just to make sure there's no leaks, and prep is everything. So now I'll be applying my gasket maker. As you can see here, oil resistant, heat resistant. If you are to make your own gasket, you want to use this stuff. Just make sure it can stand up to the heat as well. Now take your supercharger inlet and bolt it on. Now same thing for the inlet side. The only difference this time, you don't have to put the gasket on twice if you have an older version of the kit that uses the old inlet manifold, just as this adapts the Eaton to use our manifold. The newer kits will have this pipe welded on to this bracket, so there's no need for two plates. Now only put your gasket on the manifold itself and the supercharger when using the plate, just as the sizes will conform to the plate. If you put gasket on the plate itself, like I've just done there, it may come off and go through the supercharger into the engine. There you are, that step's done. Now moving on over to the car, you're going to want to mount your bottom front bracket using the stock alternator bolt. You just unbolt the bolt from the alternator and then you can reuse it. It's already got a washer on it, good to go. I'll show you that now. You will need a 13mm socket for this one. Now you want to mount it with the angle facing towards the front of the engine, and the solid part towards the back. What I like to do, put the bolt in first, then you can bolt it in that way just so it stays as one piece. It's a bit easier. Now the space here is quite limited. You're going to want to use a 13mm open end wrench. There we go, nice and snug. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is to mount the throttle body pipe to the supercharger, just as I've done here with a 90-degree silicone joiner. Unless you have the other version, which has a 90-degree bend here, just use a straight silicone joiner. Now moving it in, it is a little bit of a tight fit, but you basically just drop it in this way and rest it in position. Now the next step, before we bolt up the supercharger or put the top bracket on, we've got our auxiliary pump relocating bracket, which you're gonna have to slide between and use the same rubber grommets as from the pump and slide it into the slots. While you're doing this, you're gonna also wanna grab your power cable and just make sure it's routed up where it needs to be. Now using the original clamps, you're going to want to do up the hose onto the auxiliary pump. It starts getting slightly tight at the back here, so just be careful. Next, you're going to want to get your bolt for the bottom front bracket and push it through and just thread the nut on just so that it sits there and pivots. So the next step is going to be the top front bracket. For this model on the N46, there's only one bolt hole at the front, which is fine. On the E46, both will be tapped, but it depends on what block you have. So you want to go in this orientation with the two bolts at the back, and then this slant at the front connecting to the supercharger. Now you want to get the top M8 bolt and thread it through. Just keep the nut loose as well, like the bottom one, and make sure you have washers on both sides. There you are. Keep these bolts loose for now. Now the next thing you're going to want to do, it's a bit hard to see, but down there you're going to want to mount on the crank drive pulley. On the N46 engines, they use a 4-bolt pattern. On the N43 and N42, I believe it's a 3-bolt pattern. And I'm unsure as to what the N45 is. But either or, you reuse the stock M8 bolts, and there's no need for any special tools with these N46 engines. So here you see that's for our N46 here. This will just go on the front of the engine, start it finger tight, and then get it all the way. Use a 6mm hex wrench. But the next thing you want to do is mount up your stock pulley and additional pulley for the tensioner. And that just goes underneath the alternator, right down here. You won't really be able to see it on video, but I'll just point it out. So next what you're going to want to do is reroute your original serpentine belt and then undo the tensioner. It should be a E60 E-Torx. Alright, now you're going to want to tighten down your supercharger just using a 13mm socket and a 13mm wrench. Alright, so next what you're going to want to do is get your supercharger belt on. First feed it on the supercharger pulley. Then feed it onto the crank pulley. and then you'll need to lever it onto this tensioner. So the next step is you're going to want to put the pipe onto your intake manifold. There will be a gasket for this too, but for now I'm going to use my gasket maker. Alright, so now that you've got your intake piping on, you're gonna want to attach your bypass valve. So next thing is to attach this intercooler pipe onto here.
So now you're going to want to add the top coolant pipe, which has an extended hose off of the T, which goes to the oil cooler on the oil filter housing.
Now the next step is to get this hose up to the auxiliary pump. It is a little bit of a tight squeeze, but as long as you orient it properly, it should be just fine. We should probably get our vacuum line on too.
Now mount the throttle body with the included bolts and nuts. Now using a 3-inch or 76mm silicone joiner, attach the pod filter to the throttle body.
Let's just tighten up this clamp and then should be good to go. Alright, the next step is to put in the radiator fan. Now that you've got your radiator fan back in, we can put this next straight hose in, which goes here. You just want to get your silicone joiner on there first.